Right now, somewhere in the world, a person with less money than you, less time than you, and far more problems than you, is happier than you are. Not because life handed them something easier, not because they got lucky, but because without even realizing it, they built a handful of small habits into their day. Habits so simple you'd walk right past them if I didn't stop you and point them out. By the end of this video, you will know exactly what those habits are. Not vague advice like be positive or live in the moment. Real, specific, repeatable actions that the calmest, most content people on earth practice every single day. Habits rooted in 2,000 years of Stoic wisdom from men who buried children, lost empires, and were exiled from everything they loved, and still found peace. Stay until the end, because habit number 7 is the one almost nobody talks about, and it might be the most important one on this list. Welcome back to Wisdom of the Stoics, the place where ancient philosophy meets modern life. If you're new here, this channel exists for one reason: to take the hard-won wisdom of men like Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus and turn it into something you can actually use today in your actual life. Not theory, not abstract philosophy for a classroom, practical tools for living well. If that sounds like something you need, hit subscribe now, because what you're about to hear will change how you move through the rest of this week. Let's start with an uncomfortable truth. You have probably chased happiness in the wrong direction for most of your life. Not because you're foolish, because everyone around you is chasing it the same wrong way. The next job, the next relationship, the next purchase, the next milestone that will finally make you feel like you've arrived. And maybe you've noticed something troubling. Every time you arrive somewhere, the finish line moves. You get the raise, and 2 months later it feels normal, and you're chasing the next one. You get the relationship, and eventually the butterflies fade into routine. And some part of you starts wondering what's next. This isn't a personal failure. It's a documented psychological pattern called hedonic adaptation. Human beings return to a baseline level of happiness, no matter what happens to them, good or bad. Win the lottery, and within a year, your happiness levels off close to where they started. Lose the use of your legs, and within a year, remarkably, the same thing happens in reverse. The Stoics understood this over 2,000 years before psychologists gave it a name. They watched people around them, wealthy senators, powerful generals, celebrated poets, chase external things and end up miserable, while slaves, exiles, and prisoners sometimes achieved a kind of peace that money could never buy. And from watching this pattern play out again and again in Roman society, they extracted a simple, radical idea. Happiness is not something that happens to you. It is something you build brick by brick through what you do with your days. Not your circumstances, your habits. I want you to picture two people for a moment. Same city, same salary, same number of problems on any given week. One of them wakes up already reaching for their phone, spends the day reacting to whatever demands the loudest attention, argues internally with everything that goes wrong, and falls asleep scrolling, replaying the day's frustrations. The other wakes up with a few quiet minutes that belong only to them, meets the same frustrations with a different internal question, spends their energy only on what's actually theirs to control, and closes the day with a short, honest reckoning before sleep. Same city, same salary, same number of hard things happening to them in a given month. Wildly different internal experience of being alive. That gap, the space between those two people, is not talent, luck, or personality. It is habit, repeated daily until it becomes identity. This video is going to walk you through 9 of those habits. Small, doable, almost boring in their simplicity, but backed by both ancient Stoic philosophy and modern psychology. These aren't habits practiced by monks on mountaintops with no responsibilities. These are habits practiced by emperors running wars, by philosophers who lost everything, by ordinary people just like you, buried in deadlines and bills and traffic and difficult family members. Let's begin with the first one, because it's probably the opposite of what you've been told your whole life. Marcus Aurelius was, by any measure, one of the most powerful men who ever lived. Emperor of Rome, commander of legions, a man whose decisions shaped the fate of millions, and yet most mornings of his adult life, before the demands of the empire came crashing down on him, he did something remarkably ordinary. He sat down, often before sunrise, often exhausted, often reluctant, and he wrote to himself. We know this because those private notes survived. We call them meditations today, though he never intended them for anyone else's eyes. And in one of the most famous passages, he writes to himself something like this. At dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, I am rising to do the work of a human being. Why should I be irritated at the world when I'm going out to do what I was made for? Think about that. The most powerful man in the known world had to talk himself into getting out of bed. He struggled with exactly the same resistance you feel on a Monday morning. The difference wasn't that he had some superhuman motivation the rest of us lack. The difference is that he had a ritual, a moment before the chaos began, where he decided who he was going to be that day. Happy people do not simply wake up and let the day happen to them. They claim the first few minutes as their own, before their phone, before their inbox, before anyone else's demands enter the room. It doesn't need to be an hour of meditation and journaling and cold plunges. That's the version social media sells you, and it's exhausting just to watch. For most people who genuinely practice this, it's 5 or 10 minutes, a cup of coffee in silence, a short walk before checking a single notification, a few lines written in a notebook about what actually matters today, separate from what merely feels urgent. Here's why this works, and it's not mystical, it's mechanical. The first thing you do each morning sets the tone for your nervous system for hours afterward. If the first thing you do is open your phone and absorb 15 strangers' opinions, 3 emergencies that aren't actually emergencies, and a stream of comparison through social media, you have handed the steering wheel of your emotional state to other people before you've even stood up. You are reactive before you've had the chance to be intentional. Epictetus, a man who spent years of his life as a slave before becoming one of history's great philosophers, put it plainly, some things are within our control, and some things are not. Your circumstances arrive whether you like it or not, but how you meet them, that first internal posture, that's yours. Claim it before the world claims it for you. Try this tomorrow. Before you touch your phone, before you check anything, give yourself 60 seconds, just 60, to ask one question. Who do I want to be today, no matter what happens? You don't need a perfect answer. You just need to ask before the noise starts. Think about the last time you woke up and immediately reached for your phone. Maybe it was this morning. You opened your eyes, and within 30 seconds, you were already absorbing someone else's bad news, someone else's vacation photos, someone else's argument in a comment section. By the time your feet touched the floor, your mood had already been shaped by dozens of people you've never met, none of whom have your best interests in mind. That's not a small thing. That's the difference between starting your day as the author of it or starting your day as a reader of everyone else's. I've talked to people who swear they don't have time for a morning ritual, and I understand that mornings are chaos for most working people, especially parents. But this isn't about carving out an hour. It's about protecting 60 seconds before the noise gets in. That's not a scheduling problem. That's a willpower problem. And willpower, unlike time, is something you can train. Now, the second habit is where most people quietly fail, even when they know better. Before we move on, if you've made it this far, do me a favor and drop a comment with just the number 1. It helps me know how many of you are actually following along, and it takes 2 seconds. Now let's talk about something the happiest people almost never do, and something almost everyone else does constantly without noticing. There's a story about Epictetus that captures this habit better than any explanation could. As a young slave, his leg was broken, some accounts say by his master, in an act of cruelty. Others describe an accident. Whatever the cause, historical tradition says Epictetus reportedly reacted to the pain not with rage, but with something closer to calm observation. warning that continued force would break the limb. And when it did, simply noting that he had told him so. No hysteria, no collapse. He accepted what had already happened, because raging against a bone that is already broken does not unbreak it. That story might sound almost inhuman at first, but sit with it for a second, because there's something profound hiding inside it. Most human suffering isn't caused by events themselves. It's caused by our resistance to events that have already happened and cannot be changed. Someone cuts you off in traffic. The event lasts 2 seconds, but some people carry the anger from that 2-second event for the next 30 minutes, replaying it, narrating it, letting it poison an entire morning. The traffic didn't ruin their day. Their argument with reality did. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this constantly, almost as if he needed the reminder daily, because he did. He said that the obstacle in our path becomes the way forward, that whatever gets in the way of the action becomes the action itself. Rain cancelled his plans. Fine, the rain is now part of the plan. A betrayal from someone he trusted. Fine, that betrayal is now the material he has to work with. Not because he liked what happened, because arguing with what has already happened is a battle you cannot ever win, and fighting an unwinnable battle is where misery lives. Happy people are not people to whom nothing bad happens. That idea is a myth, and clinging to it will only make you feel cheated by life. Every single time something bad does happen, because it always does. Happy people are people who have trained themselves to ask a different first question when something goes wrong. Not, why is this happening to me? A question with no useful answer. A question that keeps you circling the drain. Instead they ask, given that this has happened, what is the most useful thing I can do right now? That single shift from why me to what now is one of the most powerful tools in the entire Stoic toolkit, and it costs nothing to practice. Think about someone you know, maybe it's you, who lost a job and spent months replaying the unfairness of it, the politics behind it, the person who should have been let go instead. That replaying doesn't get the job back. It just extends the injury month after month, long after the original event has ended. Now think about someone who lost a job and, within a week, was already updating a resume, reaching out to old contacts, treating the layoff as a strange kind of starting gun instead of a life sentence. Same event, wildly different outcomes. The difference wasn't luck. It was which question they asked first. Here's a practical version for your week. The next time something frustrating happens, you lose something, someone lets you down, a plan falls apart. Give yourself permission to feel it for exactly 1 minute. Really feel it. Stoicism was never about suppressing emotion. That's a common misunderstanding. It was about not being ruled by it. So feel it fully for 60 seconds, and then ask the question, what now? You'll be shocked how much energy that question returns to you. Energy you would have otherwise spent arguing with something that already happened and was never going to change because you were upset about it. Which brings us to a habit that sounds almost too simple to matter, until you realize how rarely anyone actually does it. Picture Marcus Aurelius at his writing desk, deep in a section of Meditations, and he draws a distinction that changed how I think about my own anxiety the first time I truly understood it. He separates the things that are up to us from the things that are not up to us. Our judgments, our efforts, our desires, our own conduct, these are up to us. Our body, our reputation, other people's opinions, the outcome of events we've already done our best on. These are not up to us, no matter how much we obsess over them. Here is what almost nobody tells you about unhappiness. An enormous percentage of it comes from spending your limited emotional energy on things that were never yours to control in the first place. Think about your average day. How much of your mental energy goes toward things you cannot actually change? What a stranger online thinks of you. Whether a coworker likes you. What might happen next year in the economy. Whether a person from your past has moved on. Whether your kids will turn out okay in 20 years. All real concerns, and almost entirely outside your control in this moment. Happy people are not people who don't care about these things. They're people who have gotten ruthlessly honest about where the boundary sits, and they've stopped bleeding energy across it. They still work hard, they still love deeply, they still show up fully for their responsibilities, but they've learned to release their grip on outcomes the second their effort ends. There's a phrase used in Stoic circles for this: the dichotomy of control. It sounds academic, but it plays out in something as small as a work presentation. You can control how well you prepare. You cannot control whether your boss likes it, whether the client says yes, whether a colleague takes credit for your idea. Pour everything into the part that's yours. Release your grip the moment it leaves your hands. Try this test this week. Every time you notice yourself spiraling, replaying a conversation, worrying about an outcome, obsessing over someone's opinion, ask one blunt question. Is this actually up to me, right now, in this moment? If the answer is no, you're not being asked to stop caring. You're being asked to stop suffering over something your suffering cannot change. Redirect that same energy toward the next thing that actually is up to you. That redirection, repeated daily, is one of the quietest but most powerful sources of peace a human being can build. I want to be honest with you about something here, because I don't think this idea gets said enough. This is genuinely hard to practice, especially with people we love. Telling a parent, let go of worrying about your adult child's choices, can sound cold, almost heartless, if you don't understand what the Stoics actually meant. They weren't saying stop loving people. They were saying love people fully, show up for them fully, and then release your grip on what you cannot control about their choices, because gripping tighter doesn't protect the people we love. It just exhausts us without changing their path even slightly. The letting go isn't about caring less. It's about suffering less for exactly the same amount of love. Now, quick pause. If this is resonating with you, hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps this video reach more people who need to hear it. And it costs you nothing. Now let's talk about something the happiest people do with their mornings and evenings that most people skip entirely, thinking it's a waste of time. Seneca, in his letters to a younger friend named Lucilius, described a nightly practice he had learned from another philosopher, a habit of asking himself, once the lights were out and the house had gone quiet, a series of honest questions. What bad habit did I curb today? What fault did I resist? In what way am I better? He described examining his entire day, going over what he'd said and done, hiding nothing from himself, sparing nothing. This is not the same as journaling for the sake of journaling, or the vague self-help idea of reflecting. This is closer to an honest audit. Not to punish yourself. Seneca is explicit that this should be done gently, like a friend reviewing your own conduct rather than an enemy searching for ammunition. The goal isn't guilt. The goal is awareness. You cannot improve what you refuse to look at honestly. Here's the psychological reason this habit correlates so strongly with happiness. Most people carry a vague, low-grade sense that their days are slipping past them. That time is passing, but nothing is actually being learned or built. That feeling, even when people can't name it, produces a quiet anxiety that sits underneath everything else. A nightly review interrupts that. It forces you to notice, even on an ordinary Tuesday, some evidence that you are growing, some small proof that today wasn't wasted, even if today felt completely unremarkable from the outside. It also does something else, something almost nobody mentions. It lets you close the door on the day. Without a deliberate review, unresolved moments from your day tend to follow you into bed, replaying themselves uninvited at 11 p.m. while you're trying to sleep. With a review, you process them on purpose, on your own terms for 5 minutes, and then you're actually allowed to put them down. Here's how to start tonight in under 5 minutes. Ask yourself 3 questions before you sleep. What went well today and why? Where did I fall short of who I want to be, and what will I do differently tomorrow? And what's one thing, however small, that I'm genuinely grateful for from today? You don't need a leather journal or a perfect system. A notes app is fine. What matters is the honesty, not the aesthetics. There's a reason this particular habit gets skipped more than almost any other on this list, even by people who genuinely want to be happier. It requires you to look directly at the parts of your day you'd rather forget. The sharp comment you made to your partner, the deadline you let slip, the moment you scrolled for 40 minutes instead of doing the thing you said mattered to you. Most people avoid this kind of honest reflection because it feels uncomfortable in the moment. But Seneca's insight was that avoiding the discomfort of a 5-minute review doesn't make the discomfort disappear. It just lets it accumulate quietly into something much heavier, a general, unexamined sense that you're not quite living the way you want to be living without ever pinpointing why. This next habit is the one that separates people who merely survive hard seasons from people who actually grow through them. There's a Stoic practice with a Latin name that sounds intimidating but is remarkably simple once you understand it. Premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of misfortunes. Seneca recommended that before any journey, any venture, any new undertaking, you spend a few minutes imagining what could go wrong, not to catastrophize, not to become anxious, but to mentally rehearse difficulty so that if it actually arrives, it arrives at a mind that has already met it once before, at least in imagination. This sounds at first glance like the exact opposite of positive thinking and the kind of relentless optimism you're told to practice on social media. And in a sense, it is the opposite. But here's what's fascinating. Modern psychology has independently arrived at almost the same conclusion. It's now called defensive pessimism, or in athletic and business circles, mental contrasting. And studies on the technique consistently find that people who briefly rehearse obstacles before pursuing a goal tend to perform better and report less anxiety than people who only visualize success. Why would imagining bad outcomes make someone happier, not more anxious? Because most anxiety isn't caused by difficulty itself. It's caused by difficulty arriving unrehearsed, catching us in a state of denial that this could ever happen to us. When the traffic jam appears and you're already 15 minutes from being late, the person who never once considered, "What if I hit traffic?" experiences pure, blindsided panic. The person who spent 30 seconds that morning thinking, "Traffic might happen, and if it does, I'll call ahead and let them know," experiences a moment of mild inconvenience, because some part of their mind already lived this scenario and decided how to handle it. Marcus Aurelius did this daily, almost as a form of armor. He would remind himself each morning that today he might encounter the ungrateful, the arrogant, the deceitful, the envious, people behaving exactly as difficult people always behave. Not to expect the worst from everyone he met, but so that if it happened, he wouldn't be shocked into anger by behavior that is, frankly, an ordinary part of being human among other humans. This is not pessimism. This is preparation, and it produces an entirely different emotional experience than the person who assumes everything will go smoothly and gets ambushed by ordinary difficulty. Try this before something that makes you nervous this week. A hard conversation, a presentation, a first date, a doctor's appointment. Spend 90 seconds asking, what's the worst realistic version of this? And if it happened, what would I actually do? Not the catastrophic, unlikely version, the worst realistic one. You'll walk in steadier because some part of you has already been there. I think about this every time I hear someone describe a difficult conversation they'd been dreading for weeks, telling a friend they hurt them, asking a boss for a raise, ending a relationship that had run its course. The dread almost always outweighs the actual event. And the people who handle these moments with the most composure are rarely the ones who got lucky with an easy outcome. They're the ones who beforehand actually let themselves imagine the hard version, the awkward silence, the disappointed reaction, the possible no, and decided in advance how they'd respond if it happened. By the time the real moment arrived, it wasn't new territory. It was familiar ground. We're at the halfway point. This next one is the habit I promised you at the very beginning of this video. the one almost nobody talks about. Seneca, a man who by the later part of his life had accumulated enormous wealth, did something that seems, on the surface, almost bizarre. Periodically, he would deliberately live like a poor man. He'd wear his roughest clothing, eat the simplest, cheapest food, sleep on a hard, plain bed, all while having the means to live in total luxury just steps away. He described doing this specifically so that if fortune ever did take his wealth away, he would already know from direct experience that he could survive it without falling apart. He wanted to test, on his own terms, whether poverty was actually the terrifying thing he feared it might be, and he discovered, again and again, that it wasn't nearly as bad as the fear of it. This is the ancient root of something you might recognize from modern life without knowing its origins. Cold showers, fasting, deliberately difficult workouts, sleeping without a pillow for a night, taking the stairs instead of the elevator on purpose, voluntary discomfort. And here's why the happiest people build this into their lives on purpose, instead of just avoiding all discomfort the way most of us are, trained to by a culture of convenience. Comfort in unlimited doses quietly makes people fragile. If your nervous system has never once practiced tolerating an uncomfortable sensation, genuine hunger, genuine cold, genuine physical effort, then the first time real hardship arrives uninvited, whether that's illness, loss, or hardship, it hits a mind and body that has never once practiced staying calm under discomfort. But if you voluntarily sat with discomfort on your own terms, at a time and intensity you chose, you build something like an emotional and physical callus, not numbness, resilience. There's also a subtler gift hidden in this habit. When you deliberately go without something, skip a meal, take a cold shower, sit in silence without your phone for an hour, you get to rediscover, almost every single time, how much you actually already have. Seneca wasn't torturing himself. He was recalibrating his sense of what enough actually means. Because comfort has a sneaky way of raising your baseline until yesterday's luxury becomes today's bare minimum, and you end up feeling deprived in the middle of abundance. Here's a version you can try this week, and I promise it's not as extreme as it sounds. Pick one small comfort, the extra 10 minutes of scrolling in bed, the elevator instead of the stairs, sugar in your coffee, and remove it. On purpose for just one day, not forever. Just to prove to yourself that you can. Notice what happens afterward when that small comfort returns. It tends to feel briefly like a genuine gift again, instead of something you'd stopped even noticing. There's a reason people who have genuinely struggled, who have known real hunger, real financial hardship, real loss, often display a kind of gratitude and steadiness that people who have never struggled sometimes lack entirely. It isn't that suffering is good. Nobody should go looking for real hardship. But it's worth noticing that people who have never once been uncomfortable on purpose often fall apart at the first uninvited difficulty, simply because it's the first time they've ever met it. Voluntary discomfort is a way of building that same resilience without waiting for tragedy to teach it to you the hard way. If you're still with me, I want to genuinely thank you. Most viewers don't make it this far into a video like this, and the fact that you have tells me this content actually matters to you. If it's landing, subscribing costs nothing, and it tells me to keep making more of exactly this. Now let's talk about a habit that has almost nothing to do with philosophy on the surface, and everything to do with it underneath. That's not a metaphor for something spooky. It's literally what the Stoics called reading. Seneca wrote to Lucilius, urging him to spend time daily with the great minds who came before him, to read, and more importantly, to read deeply rather than widely, returning again and again to a small number of writers who genuinely shaped his character, rather than skimming endlessly across everything available. He said something that still lands hard today. It is choosing books, and it is choosing which authors you allow to shape your mind. That separates a wandering, restless reader from someone who is actually becoming wiser. Here's why this belongs on a list about happiness, of all things. Every single person alive today is, whether they realize it or not, absorbing the values of whatever they consume most. If the majority of your daily input is outrage, comparison, and manufactured urgency, the diet most people are unknowingly fed by algorithms optimized purely for engagement, not well-being. Your internal state will reflect exactly that. You cannot marinate in anxiety-inducing content for hours a day and expect to feel calm. The happiest people I've studied, read about, and honestly met in my own life tend to share one quiet trait. They curate what enters their mind with the same seriousness other people apply to what enters their body. They spend time, even just 20 minutes a day, with writing that has survived hundreds or thousands of years, because writing that has survived that long has by definition said something true enough about human nature that it kept mattering across entirely different centuries, languages, and civilizations. That's a different kind of nourishment than the latest algorithm-optimized outrage cycle, which is designed to matter for exactly one day before it's replaced by the next manufactured crisis. This doesn't mean throw away your phone or become a hermit. It means being intentional. 20 minutes with meditations, with letters from a Stoic, with any writer whose ideas have outlasted their era, does something that 20 minutes of scrolling simply cannot. It hands you a perspective built by someone who already survived what you're currently going through, whether that's grief, ambition, fear, failure, or the very human search for meaning. Here's a simple way to start. Pick one page, just one page, of a genuinely great old book and read it slowly before you pick up your phone in the morning. Not for productivity, not to finish it fast. To spend a few minutes each day on purpose, in the company of someone wiser than the algorithm. I think of this habit almost like choosing your dinner guests. If you could sit at your table each evening with anyone from history, would you invite the version of humanity currently screaming for attention on your phone, outraged, exaggerating, competing for your reaction? Or would you rather sit with someone like Marcus Aurelius, exhausted after a day of running an empire, admitting quietly to himself that he too struggled, that he too failed, that he too had to start over again the next morning? One guest leaves you agitated, the other leaves you steadier than you were before you sat down. You get to choose who joins you. Most people simply forget they're allowed to. Let me pause here and say something directly to you, because I think it matters. If any of these first 7 habits felt like they were describing a part of your life you already suspected needed attention, that's not a coincidence, and it's not an accident that you're still watching. Something in you already knows which of these habits you're missing. Keep that feeling in mind, because I'm going to ask you about it directly before this video ends. Marcus Aurelius opens the very first section of Meditations with something people often skip past too quickly. Before any philosophy, before any advice on how to live, he simply lists the people in his life and what each one taught him. His grandfather's gentleness, his mother's piety and generosity, his tutor's ability to endure hard work. Page after page, name after name, specific trait after specific trait. This is gratitude, but not the fluffy greeting card version of gratitude that gets mocked online. This is precise, specific, almost forensic in its detail. And that specificity is exactly what makes it work. Modern psychology backs this up almost perfectly. Vague gratitude. I'm grateful for my family, repeated the same way every day, loses its emotional power quickly, because the brain adapts to vague, repeated statements the same way it adapts to anything repeated without variation. But specific gratitude, naming exactly what someone did, exactly why it mattered, exactly how it changed something for you, keeps producing a real emotional response, because it forces your mind to actually relive the moment rather than just repeat a phrase. Happy people don't wait to feel grateful. That's the crucial distinction. They treat gratitude as a discipline, something practiced on purpose whether or not the feeling shows up first. Much like Marcus Aurelius, on a day when the empire was falling apart around him, on a day filled with betrayal and exhaustion, still sat down and specifically named what his teachers and family had given him. He didn't wait until he felt like it. The practice came first. The feeling, more often than not, followed. Try this tonight and be specific. This is the part almost everyone gets wrong. Not, I'm grateful for my friend. Instead, I'm grateful that my friend called me back at 11 p.m. last week, even though she had work in the morning, just because she could hear something was wrong in my voice. That level of detail is what actually moves the needle. Vague gratitude is a habit that fades. Specific gratitude is a habit that compounds. Consider how differently two people can experience the exact same ordinary Tuesday. One person walks through the day noticing nothing in particular. The commute is just a commute. The co-worker's help is just expected. The dinner on the table is just dinner. Another person practicing this same discipline notices that the bus actually came on time for once, that a co-worker stayed 10 extra minutes to help without being asked, that someone cooked a meal out of love rather than obligation. Nothing about the day itself was different. What was different is that one person trained their attention to catch the good. That was already there, quietly the whole time. One more thing before the final habit, because it's the one that ties everything else together. This might sound like the darkest habit on this entire list, and I understand if it makes you uncomfortable. But stay with me, because this is, without exaggeration, one of the most life-changing ideas in the entire Stoic tradition, and it's the reason emperors, philosophers, and ordinary Romans 2,000 years ago found genuine peace in the middle of chaos. Memento mori. Remember that you will die. Roman generals, according to tradition, would have a servant walk behind them during victory parades, whispering some version of, "Remember, you are mortal," even during their greatest moments of triumph, when it would have been easiest to believe they were invincible. Marcus Aurelius returns to this idea constantly throughout meditations, reminding himself again and again that he could leave this life right now, and that this thought, rather than being applied as a source of dread, should shape every choice he makes about what he says, does, and thinks in whatever time remains. Here's why this belongs at the very top of a list about happiness, of all places. Almost everything that steals our happiness, grudges we won't let go of, arguments we keep alive out of pride, hours spent scrolling, years spent postponing the conversation we actually need to have, the apology, the phone call, the trip, the "I love you" we assume there will always be time to say later. All of it depends on a hidden assumption most of us never examine, the assumption that we have unlimited time. The moment you genuinely sit with the fact that your time is not unlimited, not in a morbid, paralyzing way, but in a clarifying way, your priorities reorganize themselves almost instantly. The grudge suddenly looks smaller. The argument suddenly looks like a poor use of a limited resource. The phone call you've been putting off suddenly looks urgent in a way it didn't 5 minutes ago. This isn't about being obsessed with death or living in fear of it. It's closer to the opposite. It's about using the fact of death, the one certainty every single human being shares, regardless of wealth, power, or circumstance, as a filter for what actually deserves your limited hours. The happiest people are not the people who ignore this fact. They're the people who have made peace with it, and let that peace clarify exactly how they want to spend today. Try this gently tonight. Ask yourself one honest question. If I had significantly less time than I assume I have, what would I stop tolerating? What would I finally say? What would suddenly stop mattering at all? You don't need to answer it perfectly. You just need to let the question do its work. Almost everyone who has sat beside a dying parent, or survived a serious diagnosis, or lost someone suddenly without warning, describes some version of the same realization afterward. How much time they spent on things that, in hindsight, meant almost nothing, and how little time they spent on the handful of things that meant everything. The tragedy isn't that this realization comes. The tragedy is how often it only comes after the time to act on it has already run out. Memento mori is simply an invitation to have that realization now, while there's still time left to actually do something with it. I want to tell you about a moment that, to me, captures everything we've talked about tonight. In the year 175 AD, word reached Marcus Aurelius that one of his own generals, a man named Avidius Cassius, had declared himself emperor and rebelled against him, a betrayal from someone he had trusted. In the middle of a war, at a time when Marcus was already exhausted, already grieving, already stretched past what any reasonable person should be asked to carry. By every account, this was one of the darkest moments of his reign. And what did he do? Historical accounts describe him marching toward the confrontation, not with vengeance in his heart, but reportedly saying he hoped to have the chance to show the traitor mercy, rather than punishment, that he wished he could resolve it by winning the man over, not by destroying him. Before the two armies could meet, Cassius was killed by his own soldiers.